say a few more words for us. Focus on cannabis.
Thank you, Steve, and you can tell why we have such a synergistic partnership. Very briefly, there are three mega trends in the United States: the criminalization one, the legalization one, and the cannabis brain science. I am on the side of cannabis brain science. And I just came from a national scientific meeting. And the explosion of cannabis brain science is incredible. When we started the Haight-Ashbury Clinic, lots of young people used it. Some of them had lots of problems. And in fact, I wrote the first article on the acute and chronic adverse reactions to marijuana, which, by the way, was not very popular amongst legalization people. But I also found out that the criminalization people took selective components of that and suggested that everybody that smoked marijuana that happened to. And of course, that's totally untrue. No psychoactive drug is completely harmless, and no psychoactive drug produces a problem for everybody. The classic example would be alcohol. So I just came from a national meeting in Baltimore, major research center. The advance of cannabis science is fantastic. And in fact, I will share that information with our treatment program, Mira Wood, who treats cannabis-dependent youth. The problem that I saw was what I would call an East Coast, West Coast divide. In other words, on the West Coast, you have, my opinion is, much more enlightened perspectives. The East Coast is firmly embedded in the war on drugs. And everything that they say is influenced by that. So you have an East Coast, West Coast divide. You have a criminalization, legalization divide. And then you have this developing field of cannabis neuroscience. I am in that area. This is not a science meeting. I'm not going to go into the details of the discovery of the endocannabinoid system, the research with CBD and therapeutic purposes, but I just want to say I hope scientific policy is fact-based, because what I see in these big debates is often wrong but never in doubt. Everybody has an opinion, but very little fact behind it. And in fact, there's a tremendous amount of science. So three forces: legalization, criminalization, and a health perspective. It is not just one, it is just not legalization or criminalization, but there is a huge body of scientific information that Steve and I tried to incorporate in our Journal of Psychoactive Drugs. So what am I to do now, Steve? Turn it back to Steve.
Thank you, Dave. The other thing, one thing I would note, that is very interesting that Dave taught me from the history when he opened the clinic in '57. The dominant drugs used here were cannabis and psychedelics. And very quickly how the neighborhood and the whole scene devolved, that you could trace it with the certain kinds of drugs where it became more speed, heroin, things like that, and even alcohol. The entire scene, as it were, fell apart. So it's very interesting to watch that through the years in the Haight as it goes up and down. So we're going to turn back then to, let's go back, 1967. And there was a band just up here around the corner on Ashbury. And they ran into some trouble. Now, later, after that, they became very big and decided they needed a publicist. And there was a fellow named Dennis McNally who was a trained historian. He had written a book, a very good biography of Jack Kerouac. Jerry Garcia, as it turned out, was a huge Jack Kerouac fan, loved the book. They got in touch with Dr. McNally and said, we need a publicist. He said, I don't know how to do that. They said, you're our guy. Basically want you to keep the press away from us. So he then embarked on a fascinating career as a publicist. His second book that came out was The Long Strange Trip of the Grateful Dead. I would say there's been many books about the Grateful Dead that if you're going to read just one, somebody who really knows what was going on, that's probably the one to get. Maybe if I was going to say two, it'd be Phil Lesh's book as well, which is fantastic. So his third book, more recently, is called Highway 61, which traces American music and political trends too, which I also very highly recommend to you. But we're going to hear about the scene that resulted, as he has written about it and heard directly from the band themselves, about how they got into trouble here on Ashbury. What do you got for it?
Okay.